Welcome to the ELA Academy Professional Development Series. Today, we're talking about how to keep students more organized and preserve important work products with spiral notebooks and writing portfolios. The first step to recovery is admitting there's a problem, right? Well, let's admit that some of our students have a problem with organization. Some of them just shove papers directly into their backpacks, if they don't just toss it in the trash can or leave it in the basket under their desk. Have you ever had this conversation with a student? Teacher, where's your first draft? I have a grade for it. I told you that we need it for revision today. Student, I cleaned out my backpack last night. Oh, and today's probably trash day, so that puppy is gone. Not everything needs to be preserved after one use, but what about things they will need again, like essay rubrics, or hero's journey info, or notes about a novel they're reading, or, more importantly, pre-writing and drafts for an essay? There are some things we don't want consigned prematurely to the recycling bin. How many of you have vowed in June that next year you are going to get your students organized once and for all? It's no simple task, but we do have a lot of techniques available to us. We can do the traditional binder plus index tabs thing. Then we have the pocket folders available in a rainbow of colors, spirals and composition books, and file folders. Also, we see an increasing number of teachers assigning work electronically and having students collect their work in some sort of online portfolio or file system, classrooms in the cloud. We'll talk more about that later. Pocket folders can come in handy for writing portfolios. They give you a little more organizational capacity than the manila folders. Binders, well, that's the method I grew up with, and it still makes me kind of giddy to set up a new binder. But here's the thing. Even though I liked getting organized and was definitely a teacher pleaser as a kid, where did most of my papers end up? In the pocket in the front of my binder, with a dishonest vow to myself that I'd file everything later. Since my teachers were dutifully teaching bell to bell, I'd have just enough time to throw everything into my backpack so that I could rush to my next class. Even so, my first couple of years teaching, I was determined for all of my students to have nice, orderly binders. I spent so much class time helping them set the binders up properly, give them time to file things, had the copy machine punch holes so they wouldn't have to, did binder checks and gave grades for it. It still didn't work. All I accomplished was to lose a lot of class time, put a whole lot of failing grades in the gradebook for binders, and make 2 whole cohorts resent me. But of course this was me. If you use binders and it's working for you and your students, don't mess with a good thing. But my personal preference is to use a combination of spiral notebooks and plain old manila folders. A couple of reasons for that. One is that I've been thoroughly converted to a particular system, which I'll get into shortly. But the main reason is practical. Have you ever told your students they're required to bring something, anything to your class? A binder, a spiral, a novel, homework. You give them an absolute deadline because the thing is necessary to your lesson plans. Maybe you give them an earlier deadline so you can call parents if need be and get the thing there on time. Did you have 100% compliance? I almost never did. Something as critical to the workings of my class as the spiral and the writing folder, I just didn't want to leave to the vagaries of student performance. Now again, this is strictly my preference, and you decide what works best for you and your classroom. But I decided to take advantage of Walmart's really cheap spirals and provide these for my students. That's why I used spirals instead of the nicer but more expensive composition books. Later, we found some department funds to do this, and even though I might like pocket folders better, we always had access to plenty of manila folders at school, so that's what I used for writing folders. If you've watched my Essay Basics Part 2 video, then you already know I'm a fan of Gretchen Burnaby. Most of what I do with spiral notebooks comes from her. I'll give you a quick guided tour, but if you want to learn more, she has a ton of resources available on her website, trailofbreadcrumbs.net. I also recommend each and every one of her books, and her workshops are phenomenal. She's definitely one who teaches by having you do things. So let's look at some of the great ways you can make spirals work really well for your students. The very first thing you do is take the class time to have students number every page in their spirals. Make sure they're putting the page numbers on that outside corner so they're easy to see while flipping pages. Then, at or near the front of the spiral, have them set up a table of contents and go ahead and write the page numbers down. This is incredibly important because it'll help them find things more quickly. Just make sure that every time you have them put something in their spirals, you take the time to have them update their table of contents in class. Otherwise, it won't get done. Now, it might be tempting to have students get the 3 or 5 subject spirals or to use some kind of tabs to divide the pages, but I think this is complicating things too much. Plus, I did that once, and let me say we did not use all the pages in the grammar section. We did, however, overflow the writing section and have to poach the grammar pages, which kind of defeats the purpose of all that organization. So I think the table of contents really does all you need to here. But there is a simple way to get a modicum of organization. Use both ends of the spiral. Here's how Burnaby does it roughly. Starting from the back of the spiral and working towards the middle, that's where you'd put your grammar, lists of writing ideas, and simple notes. Everything else, like daily journals, Cornell notes, writing, dialectical journals, all that goes in the front. And again, don't try to over-organize things. That's what the table of contents is there for. They'll just work from both ends, and when they reach the middle and run out of paper, it's time for a new spiral. Another thing Burnaby does at the beginning is to lay out some guidelines for the spiral. She gives them guidelines for the daily journal writing. Each one needs a date, they're confidential, and so on. And she also tells them exactly how to earn extra credit by using their grammar lessons, which she calls star points, in their journal writing. Now, you'll see that I have 2 different techniques here. These pictures are from my teacher spiral that I put on the overhead. Some things I'd have them copy down by hand, and other things I printed out and had them tape or glue on a page in the spiral. I've heard teachers say they'll never have students tape or glue again because it's a waste of time. But honestly, I think it takes a lot longer for them to write it out, especially if they're hoping to drag that out and not have to do as much real work. I kept a small supply box at each student table with stuff like tape, glue, scissors, so it was pretty quick work. I try not to have students spend too much time on non-instructional tasks like copying instructions. One critical spiral task is the daily 10-minute journal. This is something Gretchen Burnaby never skips on because it's proven to boost student writing tremendously. If you go to one of her workshops, she'll show you real student examples where the journals start out anemically and get longer and longer as students gain more confidence and enthusiasm. It's important that they be allowed to write about what they want to because this helps them develop an authentic voice. But sometimes they're at a loss for something fresh to write about, and that's where giving them a list of suggested journal topics can help. I just went online and picked a list that looked good, printed it out, and had them tape it on the last page of the spiral, so it was easy to find. Quick tip when you have a 2-sided handout, turn it sideways and tape the top edge only so that you can flip it over to look at the back. Then fold it so the title is showing. Okay, the rest of the stuff in the spiral I'll go through kind of quickly, but if you want more details, check out trailofbreadcrumbs.net or watch elaacademy.us for upcoming blog posts. If you aren't familiar with star points yet, oh my goodness, it'll revolutionize the way you approach grammar and usage. Here are a couple of star points lessons which would go in the back of the spiral, and then here's one of the main ways that Burnaby reinforces those lessons, by giving students extra credit for using star points in their daily journals. They're also a really great way to handle editing, including peer editing. To keep track of all the star points lessons in one place, you can download this chart and a key at Trail of Breadcrumbs. Tape or glue it inside the back cover for easy access. You can find all the lessons in Burnaby's book, Grammar Keepers. And if you have the book, you can access the companion website, which you can use to project the lesson directly from your computer. No bad photocopies or breaking of your book spine. You can scan this QR code or link to it from Trail of Breadcrumbs. I consider this a must-have. Principals, buy this for your teachers. Have you ever told your students they need more details in their writing? Do you have a concrete way to teach that? Burnaby helps students add a variety of details to their writing with icons. I was skeptical when I first saw this because I thought it was kind of elementary, but after just one practice exercise, I was sold. A bada bing is a particular combination of icons, action, seeing, and thinking, that Burnaby has observed over and over again in real-world writing. But of course, you'll want to experiment with lots of different ways to use icons. Check out The Story of My Thinking for explanations and examples of how this helps students write more colorfully. Just like grammar keepers will revolutionize your grammar instruction, text structures and kernel essays will revolutionize your writing instruction. I talked about these techniques at length in Essay Basics Part 2, but here's an example of a page you might have in the spiral. This is a simplified set of structures that we found to be helpful on essays for our standardized test. But of course, there are tons of text structures in this book, Text Structures from the Masters, which again, I highly recommend. So, you've seen 3 books that will help you understand more about how to teach writing and grammar, and most of that can be handled very effectively with the spiral. Let's see a little more of what that looks like. This is an 11-minute essay, which is sort of a guided timed writing. Burnaby walks students through it a paragraph at a time, then reveals the text structure at the end. Sometimes she shakes up the pre-writing process by finding interesting things to write on. This is related to her indelible moments technique. That's a fake $20 bill, by the way. Inside, I did some free writing for a minute or two about a memorable event in my life related somehow to money. Another one we did was a phone message slip related to an important phone call in our lives. Here's what a kernel essay would look like. You have the text structure at the top, then the kernel essay, which is 1 sentence for each paragraph. This is a nice alternative to outlining where students can see if their essays make sense before investing a great deal of time. Here's some revising and editing stuff. This is a paragraph overhaul, which walks students through checking each sentence of a paragraph for syntax errors. This is one where we went around to revision stations related to Burnaby's icons. We picked 1 sentence from one of our kernel essays and wrote a series of more detailed sentences using snapshots, thought shots, action, senses, and a bada bing. If you put sticky notes in the spiral, you might want to have students add a little piece of tape on each one to make sure it doesn't fall out later. Then there's all sorts of vocab and grammar stuff you can put in there. I had students tape in little handouts and charts with things like the fanboys conjunctions and prepositions. We kept a list of academic vocab that we had a Quizlet flashcard deck for, tone and attitude words, and so on. And don't forget about Cornell Notes. Your Avid teacher will thank you for helping to Avidize your campus. All sorts of handouts, of course. In pre-AP, we did a lot with archetypes and the hero's journey, so these pages were frequently consulted. Then there's literary analysis. Here's one where I taught characterization and gave students some key words and sentence stems to get started. Here's a cool little activity where we analyzed some of Dickens' writing, imitated his tone and syntax with a different subject, and then turned that prose into a poem. And then here's a poem that we annotated together. Symbolism. Here's where I taught a lesson and had students help analyze a well-known symbol, and then we applied it to symbolism in Wuthering Heights. How many times could they come back to these pages for guidance in future work? This is stuff they really struggle with, so good spiral fodder. And then Rhetoric. This is a great place to put a little soapstone analysis. But of course, never stop there. Always have them turn around and write about it. I gave them some sentence stems here as well to show them how to turn soapstone into a solid introductory paragraph. Do you have these on your standardized tests? Well, they're not just testing tasks. You'll see similar stuff in your college Blue Book exams. I had students tape copies of the rubrics in their spirals, mark them up, and refer to them often. Okay, so lots of stuff you can fill spirals with. Now let's talk about writing portfolios. In my mind, here's the main argument for writing folders. Even in the year when I had the smallest number of students, about 105, I simply could not rely on my memory to determine whether each student was making adequate progress on writing. It's too easy to see improvements in a handful of students and let your brain assume that all students are making great strides. You need to be able to sit down and say, How's Jennifer coming along? Open her writing folder, see a bunch of very short, weekly developed essays, and go, oh my gosh, I've got to work with her one-on-one. This is why I like to have the entire writing process available in one place. Is Jennifer failing to do any pre-writing and just trying to wing it on each essay? Is she making an honest effort with pre-writing but just not finding enough to write about? This is the equivalent of showing one's work in math. If we can't see the whole writing process, then how do we know where the breakdown is occurring? But there are a number of ways you can approach writing folders. It depends on what you want to accomplish, and it may also depend on your campus or district requirements. John Mueller has an excellent, very detailed discussion about portfolios on his website, which I'll also link to from my blog post. So you can put all writing of every kind in there. Every journal, every short answer response, every essay, every creative story. It might get really bulky really fast, at least I hope you're doing that much writing, but it has the advantage of completeness. You might just collect all the writing tasks related to your standardized test. That would help you focus on those high-stakes forms of writing that you and your campus are being held accountable for. You might have essays only with the whole writing process attached, so pre-writing, drafts, revision, and editing. You might have essays only, final drafts only. Best final drafts only, a sort of essay showcase. Or you can have students select their best narrative, best literary analysis, best short answer, best journal, and so on. And some teachers actually keep 2 writing folders per student, one with all writing and one of the other types. Whatever you go with, though, you want the writing folder to be more than just a place to store writing and forget about it. Make sure that you and the students are reflecting on the contents. What are they doing well? What are they struggling with? What improvements have they made? Are they meeting standards? Are they developing an authentic voice in their writing? Check out my Targeted Writing Conferences video for some ideas on working with students one-on-one. Now, here's the reason I'm addressing spirals and writing folders in the same video, and you've probably already spotted it. There's a possible conflict or overlap between the spiral and the writing folder. Some of the exercises I've proposed putting in the spiral are part of the writing process. Do those things really belong in the spiral, or should they go in the writing folder instead? Some teachers get blindsided with this conflict and wind up having students tear pages out of their spirals. For others, it doesn't matter because their writing folders are strictly for final drafts. Well, if the writing folder only has final drafts, then what if you want to look at their writing process? You might have students write the page numbers of their pre-writing and so forth on the back of the final draft, or you might include it in a table of contents on the writing folder itself. The important thing is that you figure out ahead of time how you want to handle this so that you don't wind up with a problem down the road. I said earlier that we'd address electronic solutions. I'll talk more about this in a blog post sometime, but here's the quick version. There are some awesome advantages to electronic assignments. You don't have to worry about a dog eating the student's spiral. You and your students can access everything from home. They're practicing 21st century skills, and you have greater flexibility. These are all great advantages, and I have no intention of minimizing them. But if you haven't already gone electronic, there are 3 major issues you need to consider. Real technical difficulties. I taught at a 1-to-1 high school where every student had a laptop, so going paperless seems like a no-brainer. But I can't tell you how many genuine and devastating technical difficulties we had. And because those technical difficulties were so real and so common, it was just too tempting for students who simply didn't do the work to say they had technical difficulties. How would I know otherwise? It would be unfair to count an assignment late because Google Drive failed to sync, which it frequently did. But perhaps the most serious problem, even in a 1-to-1 school, is inequality of access. Even if a student is issued a laptop, that doesn't mean there's internet access at home. And of course, some students might be using a computer for the very first time, while others have been savvy denizens of the net their whole lives. If you decide to go digital, make sure you're ready to address these issues fairly. If you're interested, I ran a couple of surveys about spirals and portfolios and electronic versus written work. Scan this QR code or look for the blog post on elaacademy.us if you're interested in seeing the responses. Just be aware that my sampling is not scientific. I distributed the surveys online, so the participants are more likely to be techie. So, just to recap, spirals are simple, but you can still keep them pretty organized. They help keep a student's work all in one place so that assignments and handouts don't get lost. They're easy to use with a very low learning curve, they're versatile, and they're cheap, at least if you hit Walmart during back-to-school sales. With writing folders, decide what the purpose of the writing folder is. A showcase? Testing accountability? Make sure you figure out how to avoid overlap with the spiral before it's an issue. And make sure you and students reflect on their writing. I hope you found this video helpful. Be sure to subscribe to my channel and follow me on social media. Also, if you like what I'm doing here, please consider supporting ELA Academy on Patreon. This is ELA Academy.